Thank you for being here today. Thank you for being part of this event. On behalf of Transform Europe, I would like to welcome you in Vienna, you and our guests. Austria is going through a very difficult phase right now. You know, the presidential elections are coming. Yet we don't meet today to discuss about that. And everyone involved in this event hopes that each one of you that has a voting right in Austria knows what is to be done in 3 weeks. Tonight we gather up to talk about Europe's duties to the refugees, the duty of the Europeans towards people that are fleeing war, poverty, violence, oppression around the world. In this evening, I have a co-host, Sretsko Horvat. He's representing DIEM, this new transnational movement emerging right now in Europe. And together with Sretsko, we will try to moderate tonight's discussion. So I would give the floor now to Sretsko, and he will tell us why Vienna, why now, and why DIEM.
Ja, zuerst guten Abend und Entschuldigung, dass wir heute Abend in Englisch sprechen. So, warum Wien? My spontaneous reaction would be, why not? But as someone who comes from a former Austro-Hungarian colony, which is Croatia, I have to remind you on a very curious historical fact, which you probably know, but if you don't know it, be with me for 1 or 2 minutes. Imagine that we are in the year 1913 in Vienna, and that 5 people who will become historical figures of the 20th century are living in Vienna, several meters away. So you have one unsuccessful painter living in Vienna. You have a worker who is working in Wien, Neustadt, for Daimler, who is also living in Vienna. You have 2 Russians who are living in Vienna. And you have the father of psychoanalysis living in Vienna. So it is just 1 year before the outbreak of the First World War. Hitler is living in Vienna. Tito is living in Vienna. Tito was the worker, of course. Trotsky and Stalin are living in Vienna, and Freud. So what I'm trying to say is, imagine this situation in Vienna 1 year before the outbreak of the First World War, and these people are living in Vienna. We can only pose questions, did they ever meet? Did they sit in a cafe? For instance, Stalin and Freud in the same cafe. Would history look like completely differently if, for instance, Freud had a psychoanalysis with young Stalin, who was probably still a poet? Would history look differently if the unsuccessful painter met, for instance, Tito? These are only questions we can pose, we don't know the answers. But we are today in Vienna, 2016, and we are in such situation. This situation was best explained by Antonio Gramsci in his prison notebooks, when he said that the old world is dying, and the new world cannot be born yet, and this is the time of morbid symptoms. One of such morbid symptoms is the refugee crisis, or what they call the refugee crisis. And tonight, during our program, we will discuss precisely this, whether it is a refugee crisis. And it brings me actually to the answer of your question, why Vienna? Vienna because at the West Balkan Conference, the Balkan route was closed, as you know. Vienna because from Vienna came the plan that the Brenner Pass will also be closed, that the border will be reintroduced. Vienna because from Vienna the Austrian government sent troops, the army, to the Macedonian-Greek border. Vienna because, as I already told you, it's a historical city. And I think we are today precisely in such a historical moment where directions can go anyway, either in the Hitler direction, Stalin direction, or Tito direction. Why? I will not give you my preferences. I think you know them, as I come from Croatia. But why DIEM? I won't answer this question, but I will invite one of the founders of DIEM25 to give the answer.
Good evening, Vienna. The title, if you looked at the banner outside, is a question. What is Europe's duty to the refugees? What is Europe's duty to itself? Now, the beautiful thing about being European is that we have a long cultural tradition from which to draw answers to such questions. Allow me to read a little dialogue from a very old text between a refugee and a European. The refugee says, yesterday, the 20th day, I escaped the wine-dark sea. And all the time, the turbulent wind and waves carried me here. Now fate drives me on shore, so that I may suffer harm here too, no doubt. And the woman who is greeting him responds, stranger, you seem neither unknowing nor ill-intentioned, but now you have come to our land and city, and you shall not go short of clothes or anything else a hard-pressed refugee deserves from those he meets. Have you recognized the text? It is the Odyssey. And the refugee is, of course, Odysseus or Ulysses. Turning to her friends, Nausicaa says to them, you must care for him, since all strangers and beggars come from Zeus. So bring him food and drink, girls, and bathe him in the river where there is shelter from the wind. Now, the way we treat the stranger, the way we treat the xenos, the foreigner, is a litmus test about our society. It is a reflection of how confident we are about ourselves and about our communities. It is a litmus test for whether we are leading a successful life as persons, as communities, as states. And by God, Europe is failing that test. And this is why we are setting up DIEM, the Democracy in Europe movement. Because the reason we are failing that litmus test is because our democratic states have come together in a very odd, strange confederacy. It is good that we have come together. For decades we were integrating with different languages, different cultures. But recently, in the last few decades, we've been disintegrating under a common currency, which was never designed to sustain the challenges of the modern capitalist world. And the result is that we have shifted all important decision-making from our democratically elected parliaments and governments into a democracy-free zone in Brussels and in Frankfurt, where terrible decisions are being reproduced, recapitulated, the result being a feedback mechanism of mutual reinforcement between authoritarianism and bad economic policies, the combination of which is making the foundations of our society, our Europe, so brittle that we cannot pass the litmus test regarding Odysseus, regarding children from Syria, regarding Afghani, Pakistani, Ghanaian, Libyan refugees. Now, for a brief moment last autumn, Chancellor Angela Merkel had an epiphany. She sounded like Nausicaa. She said, let them in, we will take them. But it didn't last long, because her own political party turned against her. Her own conservative forces that were being unleashed by this economic crisis, which is a result of a terrible architecture in Brussels, in Frankfurt, in Berlin, in Vienna, in Athens, in Rome, in Lisbon, turned against that very simple policy that goes all the way to Homer. And very soon after that, the Paris atrocities gave an opening to the return of misanthropy. Suddenly, the refugee became not a person to be looked after in order for us to pass the litmus test, but the threat, the other, the terrorist, the person that was to be kept fenced in or fenced out. This is no more than a sign that there is something deeply rotten in our Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no refugee crisis in Europe. There is a refugee crisis in Lebanon. There is a refugee crisis in Turkey. There is a refugee crisis in Iraq, in Syria. There is a refugee crisis in Jordan. In Lebanon, 40% of the population are refugees. That is a refugee crisis. We don't have a refugee crisis. We have a crisis in democracy. Indeed, in the 1930s, is happening today, when the economy, the capitalist model that we have selected, is crumbling because it's not fit to purpose. Then we tend to seek scapegoats. We fail the litmus tests that history puts on our path. Now, at the same time, we should not turn a blind eye to genuine concerns that people have, which throw them into the arms of misanthropy. It is hugely important to acknowledge the sidelining of our domestic, local, discarded laborers, of blue-collar workers that have been sidelined for decades. It is important to recognize that many of them feel left out of the enterprise culture which is being shown to them on their television screens and through marketing mechanisms every day, wherever they look at. It is important to acknowledge that even our children, because some of us are privileged enough to have children that studied in London or study in London, in Berlin, in Paris, that they do not even care about who is removing the garbage at night. And this unholy alliance between those of us who have adopted a capitalist cosmopolitanism that neglects the concerns of people who concern themselves to be treated as white trash, as the Americans say. These concerns must be looked after by progressives in Europe. We must not allow those people to drift into the arms of misanthropy, xenophobia, ultranationalism, and racism. This is why we need DIEM. Have you noticed the fallacy of building walls around our nations again? Of building walls around Europe in order to prevent the other from stepping in? Every time we build a wall, we declare our lack of confidence in ourselves. Every time we build a wall in the name of security, we spread division in our society, in our hearts, in our communities, and by spreading division, we spread a feeling and a sense of insecurity. So let them in. So let them in. It is a very simple policy, the Nafsika policy. You let the refugees in. But instead of building walls to keep them out, we should build bridges between their anxieties, the anxieties of the refugees, and the anxieties of the locals who feel shunned by the elites, by the ruling classes, by a system that considers them to be too expensive as laborers and too indebted as consumers to matter to their elites. Allow me just for one moment to speak personally. I lived out of my country for 27 years. The only way I feel I can be a true patriot is when I am in my country, now that I live in my country, to look at my country as a foreigner, as a refugee. Always look at your own as if you're not one of your own. It is the only way that the dialectic of recognition can work in order to tell you who you are and to allow you to pass the litmus test. So let me end with Homer again. In Homeric Greece, the correct way to welcome a stranger who has been washed ashore was with food and drink, with fresh clothing and fragrant oil to clean the salt of the skin, and only then to ask them what their name is. Not by means of conducting a cost-benefit analysis to find out what's in it for you if you let them in. Thank you.
You want to come back?
Yeah, sure.
try to explore how solidarity can breach borders, how transnationalization of our struggles can help us gain a new momentum in the nearest future. And what we're trying to do with this event today is basically give you impulses. The whole event today would last about 3 hours. You know probably from the program we're going to have 4 short tables, round tables with different guests from around Europe and the world. And we will try to explore exactly these questions. Of course, we have breaks that are going to be enriched with art, and a lot of labor struggles, which we like a lot and we hope you enjoyed a lot. So I would like to thank the choir you just heard before, for 29 November. They're going to be here around the evening and you're going to get the chance to talk to them a little bit longer. So now I'll take the time and introduce the first table. The first panel, the first round table today carries the title Solidarity Beyond Borders. You know yourselves, we experienced something magnificent in Europe over the summer and the spring of the previous year. It was a time where the Balkan route was open, where refugees and migrants were marching in thousands border after border, but also the time where a new narrative emerged right out of the roots of the society. It was a narrative of transnational solidarity. We could actually see solidarity breaching borders, not only physical borders, but also linguistic borders, national borders, ethnic borders, political borders. You have people from different political traditions working together to support the refugees. So, in most of our struggles, at least the ones I like to be involved in, a big slogan is always, solidarity is a weapon. So together with Lorenzo Marsili, we will try to explore now in the next panel what does solidarity beyond borders mean. Just before the panel enters the stage, which hopefully they will do on time, a couple of words for Lorenzo, who is going to be moderating the next table. Lorenzo Marsili is an author and the co-founder of the European Alternatives, an organization that has been working since 2008, trying to interconnect activists around Europe. He's at the same time moderator of a nomadic political show, as he likes to call it, called Talk Real, and together with Berardo Carboni, who is somewhere in this room, and I cannot see, they organized the launch of DIEM in Italy. So I hope Lorenzo comes out. Yay!
Good evening. Good evening, everybody, for what is a very important event and a very delicate moment. I don't need to tell you or to tell the great speakers we're having here tonight the danger of the situation we're currently going through. The rise of the extreme or the xenophobic right across Europe and across the Western Hemisphere, from Donald Trump in the United States to Le Pen in France to the current government of Poland, to their teachers, the authoritarian government of Orbán, just a few hundred kilometers from here. And of course, to Austria, not only for the results of the first round of the presidential elections a few days ago, but also for what the current government is doing. And as an Italian, allow me to say that the fact that only a few kilometers from here, the Austrian government is building a wall at the Brenner Pass to preemptively keep migrants out is the representation of the moral bankruptcy that Europe has now gotten itself into. The Brenner Pass and the collapse of that border represented, if anything, the achievement of European unity and of solidarity beyond borders, which is the topic of this first round of tonight's discussion. I don't think we need to succumb to a kind of left-wing melancholia, but on the contrary, this should incentivize us to act as Austria has shown us it is possible to act only a few months ago, when the refugees welcome movement found in Vienna and in Austria one of its most inspiring situations. The whole of Europe was galvanized by the humanity that Austria had showed during the first wave of the refugee crisis, with the Balkan route being in the headlines only a few months ago. And this is important to keep in our minds, that we are different and we're capable of great Europe-wide mobilizations in favor of solidarity and of a humane policy. I'm very delighted to be able to speak tonight with some great participants who have been directly involved in all that tonight's discussion is about. Fanny Müller-Juri is a researcher at the University of Vienna on racism and critical theory, and also an activist deeply involved in migration and refugees work. Christina Scherk-Huber, apologies for the pronunciation, is also deeply involved in civil society initiatives in support of refugees in Austria, and a collaborator of the False Hilfsfeld, which I'm sure you will know of, as well as an artist, which is a very important presence for DIEM. DIEM always makes the case that politics is not about politicians, politics is about breaking the imaginary, and artists really have a role to play. And of course, Teresa Forcadas, a Benedictine nun, a feminist, if I may say so. I think it's important to underline that aspect, especially with such a panel. A medical doctor and a great activist from Catalonia and across the Spanish state as well. Fanny, let me begin immediately from you. These two Austrias, the Austria of refugees welcome a few months ago, and the Austria of the wall at the Brendan Pass and of the results of Hofer only a few days ago. What's changed in such a few months, such a short time?
Okay, thank you very much. We really have to answer in 2 minutes, so I'm going to use some notes as well. But thanks for the question, and I can tell the story from my view in different ways, really. But let me just tell you, maybe take an approach on it to tell a story of success, and then I will also say a little something about the far right. So the long summer of migration until now, until the spring of migration in the Balkans especially, is both a result and also a driving force of a number of factors, which we are going to talk about today or discuss today and tonight. And we witnessed what can happen when the state control and the border regime and border politics of the EU meet migrant mobility strategies and also self-organized movements, and somehow give rise to something new, what we witness, not only in the summer, but also still today with the refugee and migration movement, not only where border regimes challenge or borders challenge as such, but core narratives of the EU and are still challenged. And also, so to say that the core answers given by the EU and the crisis to austerity politics, to also questions of housing, education, and obviously labor and citizenships. These are not challenged because they are disappointing still, and as we see today, the migration movement reminded society here in Austria and everywhere else really about the core questions and politics and the lack of alternatives really given by the EU and the nation states. And also, as we know today, there have been millions of people involved in the solidarity movement as well, and actively involved in refugee work, support work, and also we see a transnational or a translocal strength of these movements, and who are still and are part of circumventing national and EU policies. And these emerged initiatives really are they also developed sustainable practices of social compositions, right? And beyond politics of identity, if we talk about the anti-racist movement, for example. And they did so on a local level, on the municipal level, on the ground, in the cities also. And they still play a key role, I think, and the key political actor of this welcoming movement. Within, they have done important work, which is also obviously anti-racist, and on a social level, they also opened the space and for demands and imaginaries of an alternative Europe of solidarity, I would say. And just to say one little thing about the far right, obviously today also mainstream media is very much reporting not about those initiatives, organizations and the movement, what still is there, but they don't report about the thousands of people now who are now protesting in France, for example, or the thousands of people protesting in Fiero, Macedonia against in an anti-corruption protest. So it's also hard for public opinion to connect those fights and those movements with the current migration movement and the solidarity movement. So this is obviously playing in the hands of the far right, and this not just happened. This didn't just happen today or yesterday. And the austerity politics of the EU have also eased the way for the far right since years now.
Absolutely. Conversation, trying to build a real dynamic debate. A note of service. I was promised a clock. If I don't have one, I cannot be blamed for breaking the time because I have no idea what time it is. For continuing on this topic, there is a beautiful short story by the great Argentinian writer Borges, and it is the confession of a Nazi leader the day before he's due to be executed at the Nuremberg trials. And in a nutshell, what he says at the end is to an American general, yes, you may have won the war, but in order to win the war, you have had to become like us. And so in the end, we have won. And what he meant is that the Allies, civilized Europe, had to shed away civilization and become a warlike civilization in order to defeat the Nazis and to prevail in the war. And hence, their spirit had succeeded. I don't want to push this too far, but I see a great risk that even if we win the victory, even if we win the battle against the extreme and the far right, we do it in a way that brings their policies onto the mainstream of mainstream political parties, beginning with the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats. It is not the far right, but it is the Grand Coalition of Austria that's building a wall in the Brenner Pass. It is not... Le Pen, but it is François Hollande who is passing an emergency law in France that kills civil liberties and the capacity to demonstrate, and is imprisoning now the activists of Nuit Debout on a daily basis. So my question to Christina would be this: to what extent are the mainstream parties, to what extent are the civilized progressive parties complicit in buying in the rhetoric of the extreme right and in fact normalizing it?
Well, I think they have made a big contribution and did that nowadays right-wing slogans are actually kind of mainstream, and I think one of the biggest failures was actually that they were not able to provide stability and security. And I don't mean a stability or security of a fortress Europe, but security can be provided by those people who are able to manage change, who are able to have strategies for change, and who are able to deal with the circumstances. And I think most of the parties were really not aware about what this refugee movement actually means, that it is also actually a big chance, and that it is actually also something that either you like it or not, it will be there. You have to deal with it. You cannot only argument from a moral point of view, which I, of course, from my position usually do, but also from the view of how are we able to organize change, how are we able to deal with circumstances, and how can we accept the way it is. Definitely from a moral state of view, I think it's a disaster that the European Union allowed this kind of humanitarian catastrophe. For example, in Romania, where we are also working in collaboration with Volkshilfe. And we see here really a huge lack of management. The right-wing parties can succeed because they promise things they will not be able to hold. They promise social security. They will not do it. Everybody knows, we know, but people believe them. They believe the promises of social security. The leftist parties did not show strategies how we can make it. And they did not even show strategies in the way of how we can manage the movement of refugees. For me, what I personally saw in my experiences as a volunteer in different movements of civil society is that there are really many heroes in this civil society we have here in Austria. People from completely different point of views, from completely different perspectives, organized, worked together, collaborated, and they did the job of the government. They set up refugee camps. It's very good, this applause, because this applause is really important, because I really want to thank at this point all these amazing heroes who really show we can do it. It's not impossible. We have not sit down and be frightened about this big problem coming up to us. We just act, we just do, and we will not stop. And I would love to have this attitude in a high level of politics. I would love to see this. Okay.
Teresa, if I can bring you in here, Spain, the Spanish state, is an exception in this. It is possibly the only country in the European Union where we don't see an extreme right-wing movement, but on the contrary, we see a great progressive movement even in established party politics now. What's different, or what have you done differently in Spain?
I don't believe that in Spain we are somehow magically protected from that, so we might unfortunately hear that that happens in the near future. I hope not. But what is different in Spain is that Spain is a plurinational country. It's a country with 4 nations and 4 languages, and we had during 40 years in the 20th century a fascist dictatorship that did all it could to crush and to make disappear 3 of those 4 nations, 3 of those 4 languages. So that during those fascist years, a very strong fascist nationalism was built in Spain, but also very strong anti-fascist nationalist movements. That's the Catalan one, the Basque, as you know, with even violence against the fascism. And when Franco died in the mid-70s, then what happened is that basically the right-wing parties that won in Basque Country and also in Catalonia, they use a kind of rhetoric to speak about nationalism. That's plurality. It has to do with democracy, it has to do with anything that's far away from xenophobia, and they see, because they have their history and we have our history this way, they see how this bringing together the people to go beyond the individual and to be motivated to face a fascist dictatorship, this is something that still is alive in a way that the fascist nationalism is not, because it was replaced by a democratic movement. So here I would like to bring something that might not be very popular, but I think debates are good when they open up different perspectives, which is, of course, there is, and we know in history, a way to face catastrophes with a recourse to xenophobia and the scapegoating that Varoufakis was talking about. But don't we have in history something else? Haven't we seen the colonized countries to be able to really face up injustice because of a sense of national pride or a sense of collectiveness that goes beyond the individual? I have been able to be 4 times in Venezuela and to follow all that has happened there, and I believe many of the movements, including Podemos in Spain, have been inspired by what happened there and how these common people was able to raise and were able to do exactly what Christina was talking about, to trust that they could act, not to wait that the solution comes from above, because I don't think in history that has ever happened. So what happened actually, no? So what happened there, these people were able to not only have a sense of Simón Bolívar, they call it Bolivarian socialism, and that inspires them because of the tradition. Evo Morales does get inspired from these also traditions that were crushed or attempted to be crushed. And also in Ecuador they raised this issue of summa causae as a very old notion that actually can bring the people beyond individual. I think it's key to fight capitalism, and I think that's what we are doing here, right? So to fight, just to be sure, and especially
in an effective way the migration flow, and there are perhaps alternatives not only more moral but also more effective than bribing, for instance, the authoritarian leader of Turkey to try and do the dirty job instead of us. So I want to get your opinion, maybe starting with you, Teresa, and then coming all the way to Fanny, of what you see as concrete alternatives for the humane, effective management of the situation that we're currently facing in terms of refugees. What does solidarity beyond borders mean in practice?
Okay, that's an easy one. I think the world is complicated, and of course I don't have and I don't believe in anybody having magic solution already prepared. But some things are easy, and that one is easy, because I heard also your speech at the beginning. There is no refugee crisis. In reality, there is crisis of democracy, there is problem with capitalism. What it means is that we could perfectly, there is nothing that avoids us or that precludes us, meaning Europe, to give to everybody who wants to enter Europe at this moment, to give a visa. I'm speaking especially about the people coming from Syria, to give a normal visa that they can come into any European country, 2 years visa. These people have money, most of them. That's, of course, the problem of the migrants that come because of economic poverty is also something I want to take into consideration. But the hype now and the problem and the headlines of the newspapers and where all this effort is concentrated and the policies that are xenophobic that come across these, for example, a little parenthesis, I was in Poland 2 weeks ago. In Poland they don't have immigrants, but they have anti-immigration fear and crisis, right? That's very significant, right? The problem is not a real one, it's constructed. So, just briefly, most of these people, and I'm sure you are all aware of, to come even to arrive to Lesbos and to be able to then start this pilgrimage through or be stopped on their tracks, they have to pay the amount of 50,000 euros per family, 70,000 euros per family, and they pay that to mafias that are linked to the Turkish army. And we are allowing this to happen because with 50,000, 70,000, okay, you're not going to be rich in Europe, but you can start something. You can rent an apartment, and if you have friends and you have other relatives, you might be able to start or to imagine for yourself and your family 2 years, hoping that this war won't last longer than that, and that depends also on what kind of pressure we put on our governments. And I stop because of the signals.
And I want to give you all a last word to speak a little bit about DIEM in a 1 minute final slogan. Christina Fanno.
Okay, about pragmatic solutions for the refugee crisis, I don't have it in my pocket, but of course it's solvable. Austria had 160,000 refugees during the Bosnia War in 1990, and nobody was really feeling it. It was not a big deal. Actually, it must be possible. It's a question of management. What civil society can do actually is just not stop speaking with people. And I mean as well the people that are helping, that are working. I mean the people that have the opinion that it should work. And also actually the refugees. For them it's extra hard because they are confronted with so much problem. But as you said, we see at those points where actually really people live, the less migrants you have, the more xenophobia you actually have. And it's definitely possible to create a hybrid society. Actually, it must be possible, and it is possible. And here really there has to be made a strong investment in empowerment of people. We cannot bring refugees in this role of the ever taking the poor one, the people without dignity. They have to have empowerment for their rights. They have to be able to speak for themselves. They have to be interwoven in society, not assimilated but interwoven. And there should be really big investments, because at that point, when we reached that point of a kind of hybrid society, I think many of these fears that are actually rising up and that are making us building fences for whatever reason would probably decrease. So and what's also very important, there is no profound asylum system, and asylum is not a mercy act, it's a right, it's a human right.
I can only repeat what was already said, but maybe to go back also to this trust of the movement and to trust themselves and the new practices people learned. I think there are some solutions and alternative policies that everybody somehow learned from the migration movements, also in their demands of the freedom of movement, which is, I think, a bit more important also because Idomeni, for example, is a humanitarian crisis, not so much as a political produced situation, which is still, there are still fights against this, and it's not only a humanitarian crisis, but there are politics implemented, and people are still fighting against it. And also, on the other hand, I think we have to check out what we do in everyday life, everybody who is active and on the ground, if you want to say so. And this also in the cities or on the ground or in the towns, people, these are the places where people arrive and where actual politics find the common, I don't know, the institutional, the experimentations, the common struggles, they happen there, and people can trust these experiences, and there's a lot of sustainable experiences we can go back to. And I think also the current moment, also with the far right in mind, but I think it's still promising for redefining, for example, citizenship from below, and not from above, obviously.
Fanny, I want to start from you for a very last quick round, 45 seconds each. Tonight is also about launching and presenting DIEM, Democracy in Europe movement in Austria. What do you think DIEM, as a pan-European movement, can do or should do to come and be a helpful political subject in the struggle for a greater and more humane response to the refugee crisis? Same question for
45 seconds, right? So, I mean, we said a lot already, and this is also the point of a populist left movement. It's not only DIEM who has these discussions, also in Austria, obviously, there's Für Aufbruch, which is going to happen in the beginning of June. We have these discussions, and we also can, I think also we need a populist left. Why not? And we need these movements also on this level, but still, if there is no connection to the movements on the ground, if there's no connection to the experiences people made through coming, fighting borders and challenging EU policies, if there's no direct connection and representation also within a populist left movement of those people who were coming and new arrivals, who fought these fights and who we fight the struggles together. If this is not there, then obviously this is not enough, this is not going to be enough. So let's learn from history, let's learn from also social movements from before and anti-racist struggles from before. I think this we have to think about, and also to connect to the fights, that struggles or battles of ideas that are already happening on the ground. There you can strengthen the movement as a populist left as well, when you give resources to those people who are already
internationally. Christina?
Even if I have 4 seconds, I'd like to mention that I'm here as a substitute for Erich Fenninger from the Volkshilfe, because he's sick.
We're very happy you're here.
Nobody said that yet, but what DIEM can do, actually keeping up the spirit. I think the times are over that we leftists are fighting in some backyards about which is the right way of Marxism and what is the real anti-capitalistic structure, and we can only have a good life if there's no anti-capitalism. Really time to act, to solidarize, to be tolerant against people who have maybe a little bit different positions but are mainly on the right side. May they be bourgeois, may they be punks, whatever, it doesn't matter. It's time to network, it's time to exchange knowledge, it's time to act, and it's time to have a good mood, because we can never win if we are desperate and melancholic left will some.
So what I think is that I would like to join these high spirits with a preparation for a clash. I mean, I don't think it's going to happen without non-violent civil disobedience. That's not to bring spirits down, it's to keep them up, but to keep them up in a way that they're prepared. Because I mentioned about this Oxfam Intermon or Oxfam International, this being aware of how the power is distributed nowadays across the world, of course in Europe, being aware of what huge issues, they said I'm a medical doctor and I know what's going on also in the medical industry, and I don't have time now, of course, to go on, but it's both. I think we have to absolutely recover this political subjectivity, who is the actor of history. I've said before, changes don't come from above, has never happened. Changes for social justice, of course, other kind of changes, yes. So this is below. This having the power is breaking through the alienation that makes you think, okay, we have to wait for savior. No, saviors are below, and it's all of us. But also being able to prepare for something that it's not going to be easy. I would just think it can happen, like if we are not prepared enough, that when conflicts happen, and they will happen, then we just weaken. So no, prepare for something that can be really an empowering experience, something that it's our generation has to be ready to face their claim and their responsibility, and prepare for that in the sense of civil disobedience. Don't think only through the established institutional rails this is going to be achieved.
Politics of Fear. We're joined by Alexander Strickner, Alexandra is an economist. She is also founder and current president of ATTAC Austria. She, among other things, she works on the campaign against CTIP and CETA, and also on matters related to socio-ecological transition. Welcome. We also are joined by Cristina Soler Savini. She's a Franco-Italian political scientist and author. She has been involved in politics for several years. In fact, she left the Socialist Party on the 8th of February and joined DIEM on the 9th, when DIEM was founded. She's currently a research fellow in Paris and a very active DIEM25 member. And also we are joined by Sakia Salehi. Sakia was born in Afghanistan. She came to Austria 11 years ago. She's a political science student, and she's also has just worked as a volunteer in refugee camps. She currently works with refugee minors, and also is a frequent speaker on matters of current affairs in Afghanistan, and her experience as a former refugee seeker. We have been accustomed to politics of fear over the past several decades, from the first Iraq War to the West policy on war on terror since 9/11. The theme of them versus us, their threatening our way of life, has been quite effective in forwarding policies which have often led to conflict and the restriction of freedoms. This is the case in Europe today as well. However, here we're experiencing how extremist groups are able to efficiently use irrational fear in order to pursue the same evil goals that many years ago we faced in Europe. This is largely due to two elements: the European establishment's inability to tackle the Union's various crises, and also the extremist group's ability to connect with a growing, vexed public. So, on this current scenario, and as we heard in the previous panel, Alexandra, what is it that is the response? We know that there was a change in attitude in Austria. Is there a response from civil society for movements? Is there an initiative as an alternative to what we are experiencing here?
Yeah, thanks, Luis. Fanny has already been explaining of what is happening in Austria, and I think we can all agree, seeing what has happened in the past months, after this moment of hope that we had in summer of so many people going out and helping, that it's the Conservative and the Social Democratic parties that are doing the job of the far right, and that their approach and their answers have become hegemonic. And what we need to do is, and I would say that right now, only a few weeks before the second round of presidential elections, I would even say that, at least I could say it for me, that fear has become even more generalized, because I think we all fear to some extent something, and we fear different things. I do fear that we will soon have probably a president that comes from the far right, of which we have not an idea of what he will do after that. So in that sense, I think it's really important that we start to move ourselves and to do something. And Fanny has been already saying in a very short and quick moment of something that is about to happen, of what people from the left to emancipatory people looking for emancipatory answers have started to work on. It's an initiative that is called Aufbruch in German, in departure, perhaps as one attempt to try and say an English word for that. And its first step, it will happen on the 3rd and the 4th of June in Vienna. I have brought several of these flyers that you can find also outside, and otherwise, if they are not there anymore when you go out, you can find the information under aufbruch.or.at. And it's a first moment where we will meet. And the idea is to start to get together and to start to say, we don't want to accept that things are going this way. We want to start work together and develop an alternative, develop an answer to what is happening. And I think the first step that we need to do, and that's where we can learn from the movements in Spain and in Greece, for instance, is that we need to start giving answers, to start organizing ourselves at the very local level, and to do that also recognizing that people many people in Austria, as it was said also before, but because of austerity policies, because of globalization, because of this capitalist economy that we have, are increasingly confronted with either unemployment, with precarious jobs, with fears for the future, with fears for the future of their children, and we need to create that space together, bringing in these people, giving answers to them, as well as bringing in people that come to Austria because they are also seeking a secure place for their lives. And I think that's the first moment, and I really invite you all to come and join us, or to think, if you cannot come at that moment, to join this movement in the future, because if we are capable to give a different answer, it is us all together that have to start and do that.
Zakia, in line with what Alexandra has been saying, what can you tell us about how refugees are getting organized, self-organized, and their relation with other movements, domestic movements?
Well, as we all know, starting a new life in a completely new country is the hardest thing, and people always feel lost. Because they don't know the language, they don't know anything. There is a huge lack of information. For example, they don't even know how to send their children to school because they don't have the information they need. And there are a lot of volunteers. And also people, for example, from Syria or from Afghanistan who speak the language of the refugees, try to help these people, try to make things easier for them, for example, giving them information in their language from the beginning, and providing them, for example, language classes. And these are things that help these people starting their new life.
Christina, going back directly to fear-mongering, earlier this year, David Cameron warned that Calais could become a magnet for migrants. Is this message that basically open doors policy is asking for trouble? Did it strike a chord with France? And obviously tell us a little bit what's happening today in Calais.
Yes, words like that are poison for us in France. You know, in France we have the Le Pen family. We have 3 generations of Le Pen. And so when we try to imitate extreme right, they win, we lost. So we have the same problem with our government. When you use the same narrative of extreme right parties or nationalist parties, and you use fear against your citizen, it's a real problem for us. I visited Calais. Calais is called the jungle. For me, it's something worse than a jungle. I visited also the official camp, the northern part of the Calais camp. And I think it's something like Dante Inferno. It's something you can imagine. I was really shocked and scared about it, because I want to share something with you tonight. We have in Calais 400 children who are alone, without parents, without family. And now our British friends are saying that 100 of them have family in UK, so it's easy. They could join her family in Calais, but UK said it's impossible. They have to wait. Children have to wait 9-10 months just to have an answer. Not even a good answer, just to have an answer. So Calais is Dante Inferno now, and our politicians don't act for change the situation.
Evidently, mass media has its role in the spreading of fear-mongering and politics of fear. The dissemination of these messages is very effective, but also through social media. I mean, the hashtag #rapefugees was horrible, wrong, but highly effective. So, Sakya, we're not only dealing here with disinformation, but also the optics, perception, the reinforcement of prejudice. What's your personal experience in confronting those attacks?
Well, there are lots of prejudices. For example, and politics on the whole, or politics of fear, often help to focus on these prejudices. For example, refugees don't want to work, they are lazy, they don't want to integrate. But these are not the facts. For example, you shouldn't just focus on the situation at the moment, well, the new refugees only, but you have also to look at refugees who are here for, I don't know, maybe for 6, 7 or 10 years. You can see the transformation. They do have integrated themselves in the society, they do work, they are not here just to, because of the social benefits. And that's a fact. There are lots of people from other countries who live here just like Austrians. And it's really sad seeing how politics or media, for example, only focus on these perceptions.
In Spain, Christina, coverage of the refugee crisis is a little bit different thus far. It is benign, actually. It's very critical of our government and of the European Union's institutions' handling of the crisis. Of course, we don't have extreme right movements yet, or political forces, and geography puts a distance. How is it so in France?
In France, it is a little bit different. We have a problem with traditional media, mass media. We have some exceptions, like Mediapart, are free media, but traditional media follow the government communications, so they are not really friendly about the problem of refugees. They dehumanize, they explain that it is a problem. They explain that we are in a bad war. They explain every day that refugees can be possibly terrorists. And when you have this kind of message every day, it's a real political fear. So we have a huge problem with traditional media.
Alexander, what cues do we need to take from other countries and other movements that you mentioned before to really confront the situation?
Yeah, I think particularly also against the fact that media is working in that way, and we have little control in most cases of that. I think what we can learn, or what at least I think from the Spanish and the Greek experience we can learn, is that we need to create spaces where we can meet. In Spain, for instance, you had first the Plaza del Sol movement, but then people didn't, once they have left the square, it was not that people stopped meeting. It was moving into the quarters. People continued to meet. And I think the question is, where can we counter what is said in the media? Where do we have the possibilities to create a space to have a different narrative, to also have moments where people can meet face to face and not only read something over media. And I think that's an experience that we need to draw on. How do we create that? And I think there we come back to the fact that we need to start organizing. We need to start to get organized to have moments and places where people can meet and start talking about what is happening. Because, yeah, when you read every day or every week about refugees or about, we talked with Zakia before, about violence against women, then people start to feel at some stage this insecurity. And where do they go? Where can they have a different story? And I think that's one of the big things I think that we need to start creating, to have as a first step that is in our hands, because we will not so quickly have other mass media in our hands. And I think what is important in my view, at least what I learned from the Spanish case, is creating these spaces means also to have the possibility to get a different understanding of what is happening to us, to not buy more into the narrative of everything, I mean, that the refugees and migrants are the root cause, but that it has to do with the capitalist society, how economy is organized, and there also to start build the alternatives. So in Spain you can see, and also in Greece, that from below there is coming a very vibrant dynamic of people thinking in terms of economic alternatives, how to organize things differently, how to deal with the housing problem, how to relocalize the economy, how to strengthen local economies. And I think that's something that also gives hope, that also gives concrete steps that you can move forward. And therefore I think that is one key element that we should pick up and use in the case of Austria, but also in general, I think in countries where we have that situation.
So, politics immediately conjure up appreciation for freedom of expression. Then again, we have a response similar to what Alexandra was commenting on Noix debout, and how that movement, that taking to the streets to discuss, to debate, to talk, has been received both by the media and by the establishment. And so for you and for you too, Zakia, freedom of expression is the oxygen for movements, for manifestations, for fighting fear-mongering. Tell us what's happening in that arena. Is the beloved freedom of expression still the antidote? And in the context of today, and Noix debout being an example.
Yes, now in Paris we have a new agora. We have a place to discuss, to fight against mass media, against the difficulty we have to have a place to discuss in France and in Paris. Nuit debout has given a voice back to those who decided to remain silent. So it is now a real possibility to have a discussion with young people, with students, with women, and it's important for us. We have also traditional movements and traditional manifestations with trade unions, but we have also a problem with police in France. Young people, it's very difficult to understand. We have helicopters who are spreading gas in Paris. We are not in Beirut. We are in the country of the human rights. We wrote a declaration, and now we don't remember the context of this declaration. But Nuit debout, it's fresh air for us.
Zakia, the clock is ticking, but let's not pay attention for a minute. Oxygen, ignore it. Freedom of expression, the oxygen for activism. Is it being used? Is it a battleground for you and for refugees activists?
Freedom of speech is a basic human right, and I think we shouldn't allow anyone to tell us what we are supposed to say and what we are not supposed to say. Sometimes I feel like sometimes I don't dare to say things or my opinion, but then I think, and then there is this thing that tells me that you can say everything you want. I can tell an example. I once took part in a workshop, and we were talking about the reasons why refugees leave their country. And we were criticizing the Iranian regime, for example, and we had to present our workshop in front of lots of people. And there were also supporters of that regime, and in that moment I was torn between should I say my opinion or not, but then I decided to say and to criticize that regime, and I think that's very important.
Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank. Das wär's.
Und auf einer Bühne wie diese, nichts weit von hier.
Keine Grenzen kennen, schreien Sie nach ihnen.
Sind sich einig. Alles andere aus.
Ihre Parolen und Fahnen bei uns daheim und hier bei euch gleichen sich aufs Haar, das noch anders getragen wird.
Gleichen Sie aufs Haar, das nie anders getragen wird.
Unser millionenfach vergossenes Blut des Frühlings, euer vergossenes Blut vom Bataclan, das Kunstblut im Theater, versickert in unseren Tränen.
Wir sind die, die uns jagen. Dort hierher. Wir greifen uns an.
Sind es dieselben Männer, die aus der Heimat uns folgen wie Schatten?
Oder wohnen Sie schon immer hier? Wir wissen es nicht und sagen
wir sind diese grauen Männer, die uns bewaffnen und uns spalten.
Aus welcher Heimat kommen Sie?
Aus welcher Heimat kommen Sie?
Und wer versuchten Sie zu halten? Zu beruhigen in der Nacht?
Dass sie wieder eine Farbe werden, in der Erde abbild, Farben bracht.
Und wer vermöchte, sie zu halten, zu beruhigen, in der Nacht, dass sie wieder eine Farbe werden, in der Erde, Abbild, Farbenpracht. Vielen Dank.
Thank you everybody to be here. Katja Kipping,
is a member of the German parliament and head of the German party Die Linke. Welcome, Katja. Walter Bayer is the Austrian guy in this round. He is from Vienna, and he is economist and coordinator of Transform Europe in Vienna. Thank you very much. And Jan Svanifakis is an economist too. And he's former Minister of Finance from Greece, as most of you know. The issue of this last panel is Europe's failing foreign policy, and we don't even know in which way European policy, foreign policy is failing, because at the beginning European foreign policy is the foreign policy of the member states, and the foreign policy of the member states was that everybody is making policy against the other member states. So beginning with that, it's relatively difficult to come to a practicable and humanitarian European policy on the refugee issue, as we saw in the last months. Given that we also want to be in a way, not optimistic, but looking for solutions, looking for our options and our possibilities. And I want to give the first question to Katja. If we would think to a practicable and humanitarian solution for this issue and for this challenge, which has for sure a lot of problems to handle. Open the borders for the people, but also supporting countries like Lebanon, Jordania, Turkey, as you mentioned, the countries which have really refugee crisis. What would you say? What would be a progressive policy mix to tackle the situation?
Well, a good start would be refrain from doing the wrong things, because European foreign policy is characterized by doing the opposite of what could be a solution, and refraining from doing the wrong things, such as dirty deals with dictators like Erdogan, could be a good start. Or no more export of weapons and arms, so stop arm export could be a good beginning. And unless we don't, all over Europe, accept that the right to asylum is a human right, and it's not about granting mercy, we won't be able to do the first step to a progressive European foreign policy. And speaking about, for example, the Middle East, or for example about Syria, I just can say that military intervention are definitely no solution for it. And let me point out one thing clearly. I don't know whether anybody will be able to find a proper solution for Syria, but I'm convinced without the Kurdish people, there won't be a democratic solution for this country. And the fact that the peace conference about Syria, from this conference the Kurdish forces will be excluded, underlines that right now European foreign policy is led by the wrong ideas and by wrong people, of course.
Ordinary people must understand that there is a moral duty to open the border and to receive people and to treat them humanistically and friendly and welcomingly. And now to your question in particular. During the debate, one comrade said, what did change after the Summer of Solidarity? And I would say, from the point of view of the people, nothing changed, because the same people who helped the refugees are still there and doing the same things. The only thing which actually has changed is the attitude of the government, the coalition parties and the big media. And that leads to a change in the population, because people who formerly did not dare to speak out against the refugees now dare to do so. And they occupy public spaces, they go to assemblies, they gather in front of refugee sites and refugee homes, and they make noise. And this has changed, and this is the responsibility of politics, of political parties, and of mass media. And we must cope and we must oppose this. Let me say one open word as a member of the Austrian Trade Union Federation. It is scandalous that the chairperson of the Austrian Trade Union Confederation raises his voice in favor of considering that the Social Democratic Party should make up coalitions with the Freiheitliche Partei. And it is not only scandalous, it is crazy, it is silly, because if we have learned one thing from history, then that is that the far, the radical extremist right is the outspoken enemy of the labor movement, of labor rights, and of the trade unions. And for this reason, the ÖGB has in its statute, I think it's paragraph 3, stated the ÖGB opposes any kind of right radicalism, any kind of racism, and any effort to take away democratic rights of the people. And they must apply to this statute. Only this thing. And the last sentence which I want to say in this context is, well, there is what to do. There is, of course, an easy answer. Popular answers, they stay together, talk to people, do good things. I'm afraid the answer is more complicated than this. I believe that we must recuperate politics, meaning we must not leave politics to those parties who have created the mess in which we are in. I can't earn more applause than this. Thank you very much.
We hope for the time where you don't get applause for that. Yeah? That would be a great time. Yanis, I want to touch a little bit another field, or interconnected field, if you allow. How is the social crisis and the humanitarian crisis we are now facing, which means the negative attitude to refugees, interconnected? Because also in the question of foreign policy, we have this European disaster that every country is working against the other country. We had it first at the question of the financial crisis. Now we have it again with dealing with this humanitarian challenge. On the other hand, we can only solve this humanitarian challenge if we leave austerity politics. Am I right with that? What would you say to that?
You're absolutely right. The disintegration of the core of the European Union, which is due to the economic crisis, which was inevitable given the way we constructed the European Union, and in particular the common currency, is turning a sequence of 3 words into a joke. Put together the words European foreign policy and you end up with a joke. But before I come back to the relationship between the economic crisis and the joke that is European foreign policy, let me say that it is absolutely impossible to have a coherent, let alone humanistic, European foreign policy as long as Europe is under or within the black cloud of NATO. It is really very simple. This is speaking to what Srečko Horvat was saying before about the geopolitics, we would not be able to solve the geopolitical equation that leads to refugees streaming all over the world if we maintain the Cold War alliance with the United States that is firstly, besides the point now, the Cold War is finished and we have the relic of the Cold War, which is trying to find, constantly to find, reasons for perpetuating its existence. And at this point, I want to draw everyone's attention to a delicious paradox. A terrible paradox, but it would be delicious if it was not so toxic. It is this. Let me take you back to 2015, when our government was elected to oppose the troika of lenders, to oppose austerity, to reboot Europe by ending the toxic bailouts, the extend and pretend loans, which were coming to us, to the whole periphery of Europe, attached with Austerian strings that furthered the deflation, and in the end came back to Austria and to Germany in the form of negative interest rates that, as Wolfgang Schäuble correctly said, is inflaming the forces of reaction of the AfD, of ultranationalism and so on and so forth. During that period, what was the position of the United States of America? What was the position of the administration? When we were elected, let me remind you, President Obama came out with a very good statement. He said, I don't know whether this is verbatim, but the essence of what he said was that the principle of the greatest austerity for the most bankrupt nation, he meant Greece, needs to be rethought. Well, that's what we were saying. Yeah? So what did Europe respond to that? Get off our territory. We are not going to be lectured by the United States of America. We just hold this for a moment. But when it comes to foreign policy, it's NATO. And it's whatever the United States administration says, except that the United States administration is confused. And they're fighting each other. So the State Department has a different policy in Ukraine than the Pentagon. The Pentagon has a different policy to the CIA. You have the same country sponsoring different terrorist organizations, different resistance groups, and different political forces throughout the world. Yeah? So the only conflict is between different agencies of the United States. Europe is waiting for the line, the party line, as if we were in a communist party. And the Washington line, once Washington decides what it is simply regurgitated, recapitulated, repeated. So compare and contrast. We have a unique capacity in Europe to import only the bad things from America. So the New Deal, the idea that austerity must end in the periphery of Europe, is rejected with contempt by Europeans wishing to assert their own independence from the United States. The good things are rejected. All the terrible things that come from the United States, immediately we lap them up. And I think that in this paradox you understand the how advanced a stage of disintegration we labor under here in Europe.
Maybe some seconds more. So let's come to a last round where we should really talk about what kind of difference we can make. Because it doesn't make a lot of sense to say, okay, the government of Germany, the government of France, the government, they are all bullshit. They are all they don't know anything, and if they do something, they do the wrong thing. We know that. But what can we do? What can DIEM do? What should DIEM be? How is there, or put it in the question of our panel, is there a pressure for another European foreign policy possible? A pressure by the people, by the citizens of Europe, by us who are in a kind of discontent with this policy. What would you say? I think the question to all of you three, maybe, yeah.
Well, First of all, I share Yannis' passion about NATO, the dark cloud over Europe. But let me say, here in Austria, we are not member of NATO. We still are a neutral country. And by the way, this neutrality of Austria was recognized in the Lisbon Treaty. So it is not so that there is a complete congruency between NATO and the European Union. And I think and I believe that the Austrian left should stick with defending the idea of neutrality, which is not the idea of isolating, existing in a large sea of violence, but which is the idea of demilitarization of foreign relations, of creating spaces of cooperation, of being welcoming. I mean that 150,000 Hungarian refugees after the revolution could come to Austria, that approximately 50,000 Jewish citizens of the Soviet Union could go through Austria and then to Israel. This has to do, firstly, with the particular international status of being a neutral country, and secondly, was the wise policy which at that time was applied by Bruno Kreisky and Rudolf Kirchschläger and other people here in the country. And I think we should stick to this tradition. And finally, the issue of optimism and pessimism. There's this wonderful quotation of Gramsci: you ought to be pessimistic when it comes to analysis, and you ought to be optimistic when it comes to election. What justifies pessimism is the very fact that we are living in a country where maybe, hopefully not, but maybe, we are going to have a president who says, culturally, linguistically, historically, this country belongs to Germany. Can you imagine this? Can you imagine a Greek president saying, our country belongs to, I don't know, to which country? Or could you imagine a president of the United States saying, because the most of us are speaking English, we belong to the United Kingdom? This is absurd. And the possibility that such a thing happens is definitely not a reason to be optimistic. But there are reasons to be optimistic, because we need reinventing the left, but that must be a broad left, and it must go beyond party borders, and it must go beyond philosophical borders. Take the Catholic Church as an example. I have in my mind the picture when Pope Francis took 12 refugees from Lesbos and Syrian refugees, Muslim refugees, and brought them to Rome. If the Pope was an Austrian citizen, he would be dubbed as a good mensch, and most probably he would suit for human trafficking. There are things possible. Maybe at the crossroads as we are, we have the possibility to create something new, to create a new Austrian left, to make an Aufbruch, a departure. And if this happened, maybe the rules of the game could change. And that's why, finally, I'm pretty optimistic.
There is no guarantee that at the end of the day we will make the difference, but I think we have the obligation to try it. And just one concrete suggestion. Right now, we can see that with the TTIP, a massive attack against democracy is planned. And the good message is we still can stop it. And I think it's our obligation to put pressure on every government who wants to ratificate this attack against democracy. And, you know, this treaty will influence all our lives. So I would say it's the right of all people living in Europe to have a referendum about this, and we would of course vote against this treaty. And I would say if the government is not allowing us such a referendum, we should take it in our own hands and say, okay, then let's have a wild referendum because it's our continent. Remark, I suggest we should concentrate our protests on the social democracy. Because for Germany, I know it for sure from the surveys, 70% of the social democrats are against the TTIP. Unfortunately, the leader, the president of the social democrats, is in favor of the TTIP. So we have to concentrate our protest on them because they are the weakest target and they have to be turned in this question. And let me, well, speaking about the refugee question in the media and in the talk shows, there are always this word problems appears. Problems or potential problematic developments, so I'd like to add an optimistic note. Generations have been raised in the idea of post-politics. Politics was something considered to be more or less boring and, you know, you could decide this way or this way, it doesn't make any difference. And now with the refugee question, we have a question where people in all generations are asked to take sides. And when everybody in the media is speaking about rising right-wing populism, let's not forget that now there's a new generation who is passionately taking sides for solidarity. And I think there is hope. And if in these days there is still hope in Europe, it's not the achievement of the EU elites. It's the achievement of the volunteers and the activists and the pan-European networks for solidarity. And this is something we can go on with and let's say clear, this continent belongs to us, it belongs to the many and we don't leave it to the EU elites. Thank you.
We need to overcome an illusion. There is this illusion, the specter of the illusion in Europe, that there is a tension between democratizing the European Union or democratizing and democratizing the nation state, the region, the municipality, the city. At the moment, your parliament in Austria has very little power because of the lack of democracy in Brussels. It is a mistake to think that you can democratize Austria better by moving away or allowing the process of disintegration of the European Union to continue. The reinvigoration of democracy in your locality, in your nation, passes through the democratization of European Union institutions. European Union institutions do not want to be democratized. They will fight tooth and nail. They have a deep, deep contempt for democratic process, for the Austrian people, the German people, the Greek people. They are like a cartel. We need to confront them, to democratize the European Union in order to give more degrees of freedom, more sovereignty to our parliaments and to our city halls. This is the challenge for Europe. And to do this, we need a pan-European movement. This is why we set up the Democracy in Europe movement, not because we are somehow Europeanists who believe that the nation state is finished, but because we are Europeanists who believe that the only way of empowering the nation state, of empowering local governments, of empowering communities, of empowering human beings, of allowing individuals to be citizens rather than no man's land, wandering atoms, We must confront the deep anti-democratic streak in Frankfurt, in Brussels, but also in Vienna, in London, in Berlin, in Athens, and in Madrid. So let me finish on a very practical note. Go to DIEM25.org and become members.
Yeah. Maybe some words from my side. I think it's very important that we as people from and citizens from Europe come together, meet regularly. That's the first thing which started with DIEM25, and it's a huge step that we know each other, that we know each other better, that we start organizing, and what we saw in this last autumn in Austria and Germany, that there are millions and 100,000 and millions of people who want to get active, but who don't know on which point they can act together. And if we make it possible for these people to act together, then we are, as a great Austrian said, then we are unstoppable. Thank you very much.
Migrants in Germany. Well, they are mostly actually minoritized. They are not your average Turkish person, you know. And so you know, we discover these things gradually, but there is an extraordinary amount of generalizing about the migration question, which we should sort of really investigate. And so the Turks, they were mostly Kurdish Turks. They were mountain people. And I remember when one of the heads of the Kurdish people was taken prisoner, there were massive demonstrations in Germany, in Berlin, etc., because they were mostly Kurdish Turks. So same thing in Morocco, the Berbers. So there are these very specialized conditions that contribute to explain the migration process. And I think it's sort of worthwhile knowing a bit about it. Yes.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Thank you also for keeping the time. Thank you very much. Let's go to you, Sandra. So we're talking about, I mean, we meet today, also the theme of the event today is our duty to the refugees. And from an ethical point of view, but also from a political point of view, we need to provide these people with security, we need to provide them with a life they hope for when they start traveling, refugees and migrants again. Still, since most of the causes of mass migration, or people, the causes that, as they push people to seek refuge in Europe but also in other countries, are actually sourced in capitalism. And the question that I would have to you is, what limits do we have for human migration policy within capitalism? Are there limitations there, and how could we breach them, if there are?
Well, it's again a very important question. Could even say that there is no capitalism without labor mobility, since the very inception of capitalism. And mobility, labor mobility, has always been a kind of field of tension, kind of field of struggle under capitalism. if you look at the way in which labor mobility, migration, internal migration, international migration has been regulated, you will find that in different historical ages there has always been a whole set of limits imposed upon mobile subjects. And nowadays we are confronted with a situation that kind of joins this long history of contested mobility of labor under capitalism. You are right when you say that nowadays migration, even economic migration, is kind of demonized in Europe. But if you look at the reports that are issued by several ministries of economy, by several corporate actors, by several think tanks in Europe, you will always find a statement, a very clear statement about the fact that Europe needs migration. It needs migration from the point of view of the stability of its labor market, but also for sheer demographic reasons and for the sustainability of welfare systems. And so we are confronted nowadays precisely with this kind of tension between political rhetorics which demonize migrants and a continuous need for migration. It is precisely this tension that produces the conditions for the exploitation of migrant labor in many parts of Europe. And it is quite easy to see that no big city in Europe could work, could reproduce itself without the contribution of a multi against each other.
I don't know if you heard about that very curious case of Berlin Gildo, who is a Swedish citizen, who was brought up in front of the court under the accusation that he was a rebel in Syria, but the whole case fell down because they realized that the British intelligence was supporting the same terrorist group in which Berlin Gildo was taking part. So you can see capitalism is full of contradictions. To answer your question, and to bring actually this discussion to a geopolitical level, because I think what we missed today is precisely geopolitics. I'm not so optimistic, thanks. I'm not so optimistic when it comes to solving the refugee crisis. You mentioned numbers. Yeah, we speak about numbers, we speak about quotas. Now we outsource the refugees to a dictator in Turkey. Then we import again. So what you have is actually export-import. First we export wars to Libya, to Syria. Then we import refugees. And then again we export money to Erdogan. And then what? Then again we import the so-called democratic values to Germany, where you have someone like Böhnemann, for instance, who would end up in front of the court. A leading member of the German Pirate Party ended up in prison because he was making fun out of Erdogan. So you see the contradictions. What is the problem? The problem is that the refugee crisis, if you ask me, but we are here to change it, cannot be solved. It cannot be solved because it's part of a bigger problem. And it's part of a bigger geopolitical picture. The refugee crisis didn't start in Syria. It didn't start in Libya. It didn't start in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in all the forgotten wars.
It started in the Pentagon.
It started in the Pentagon, yes, in the State Department. It's very important to note, it will go on. Recently, WikiLeaks published a secret document on the so-called Operation Sophia. I don't know how much you know about it, but you should Google it, go to WikiLeaks and check it out. It's a military action in the Mediterranean Sea, led by French forces, UK forces, Frontex and so on, where the first step, so it consists of three parts. The first step is military action in the high seas of the Mediterranean, in order apparently to stop the smugglers bringing refugees in. The second step is, it's not high seas anymore, but they want to come and they already are in the territorial waters of Libya. And now when you read Operation Sophia, the secret document, which is not secret fortunately anymore thanks to WikiLeaks, you will see what is the next plan. You have an Italian commander asking from the European authorities for an invasion of Libya on the ground. And what is the reason? That's the reason, and here I end, why I think there is no difference between economic migrants and asylum seekers. The reason is economy again. So the situation in Libya is completely unstable. Why is it unstable? Of course, because of us, again, because of France, Hollande, and so on, and the United States. And it's unstable, and what they need is actually a new intervention in Libya to bring, again, the economy back to Europe. So I think as long as we don't question geopolitics, what is happening in Syria, where you have more than 20 players involved, we can solve the refugee crisis. And what it shows, and this is an announcement for the next roundtable as well, is a complete failure of foreign policy of European Union.
Thank you.